The Horus Heresy left many scars on the galaxy and the Imperium, both physically and psychologically. The most obvious is of course the internment of the Emperor on the Golden Throne and the deification of him that followed, but many worlds were left irrevocably scarred as well. From the annihilation on Istvan to the civilian slaughter on Terra and everything in between, it cannot be denied that the civil war 10,000 years ago definitely left its mark. Very few worlds, however, can claim to have been as changed by the war as the one we visit today. Whilst before the heresy it was a lush, verdant world, it is now a desert and a wasteland, all but annihilated in the preliminary bombardment to what would become one of the largest tank battles in human history. Nowadays, it prospers despite being mostly sand, with its various tribes raising regiments for the Astra Militarum that are specialists in guerrilla warfare whilst also being adept in more overt, armoured assaults. The world itself is known as Tallarn, and the regiments raised there are collectively dubbed the Tallarn Desert Raiders. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Regiments of Renown, a 40k Stories miniseries. Tallarn was first colonized in M29 by humanity, and though we know nothing of its deeds or culture in that time, it was classified as an agri-world that was particularly verdant. It is located in Segmentum Tempestus, practically due south from Terra, but not too far away from the cradle of humanity in the grand scheme of things. However, beneath the planet's surface, unbeknownst to its new population, a dark secret lay buried from ancient times. This was a device known commonly as the Black Oculus, though its true name is the Cursus of Alganar, a massive black object carved with Eldari runes. What it exactly does is unknown to this day, as it is yet to be fully activated, but it seems to be a warp portal of some kind based on its partial activation and its alternate title as one of the three Gateways of the Gods. The names and natures of the other two remain unknown to my knowledge. Unfortunately for Tallarn, however, it was there, and though a terrible, terrible stroke of bad luck, it would cost the planet terribly. Following the ascension of the Primarch Fulgrim to demonhood, Perturabo and the Iron Warriors Legion were caught in the pull of a black hole that was consuming the crone world of Idris they had been on. Unable to escape, the Lord of Iron bade his sons fly straight into the black hole, trusting in the words of Fulgrim that they would meet again as proof they would survive. Unbelievably, though it heavily damaged the minds of the navigators, the plan worked, and the disoriented 4th Legion were spat out right over Tallarn. From there, Perturabo would learn of the Black Oculus's existence, and he sought it out in order to gain power, presumably of a demonic nature. Though the orbital and surface defences of Tallarn did some good work, they were blasted apart in methodical fashion by the Iron Warriors alongside an Imperial fist vessel that had attempted to flee the area. The 4th then set about bombarding Tallarn before their invasion to find the Oculus, and in typical Iron Warrior fashion, they went to the extreme, launching virus bombs upon the verdant world. This transformed Tallarn into a desert world, since everything hit with the virus bombs died, and huge amounts of the population, of course, died in the bombardments as well. The virus bombing also had the side effect of rendering the atmosphere utterly toxic and radioactive, meaning that even space marines couldn't survive in the open air for long. The Iron Warrior invasion that followed was the Battle of Tallarn, the largest tank battle in human history up to that point, and the holder of that title until M41 and the war with the Adamant Fury Titan Legion. Many tank regiments of the Imperial Army were actually based underground on Tallarn, and they sallied forth as the only possible defenders, but they were at least initially pushed back. Somehow they, along with their eventual reinforcement, scant Space Marine forces on Tallarn, and Collegia Titanica and Questor Imperialis allies, were able to hold the traitor forces what seemed to be the best part of a year. More than likely, however, they would still have lost the war, and regardless of that, the Iron Warriors were making progress toward locating the Black Oculus. Again, we still don't fully know what it does, but had the Iron Warriors awoken it, I dread to think what would have happened to Tallarn. Luckily for all involved, they didn't awaken it. They did find it, with one of their veteran dreadnoughts friend even speaking with a demon at the gate to the Oculus. But he refused to give in to temptation and thus failed the mission assigned to him by Perturabo, self-destructing and burying the Oculus once more, whilst an infiltrating Venus assassin was able to prevent comms in the area so knowledge of the device's placement did not get out. Perturabo wasn't having any more luck, to be honest, as Horus's equerry Malakhurst sent an emissary to demand an explanation for the invasion. Initially brushed off, this emissary Argonis called in the Alpha Legion's agents to discover the truth, and it was actually through those damaged navigators that he would learn of the Oculus. Argonis then got an audience with Perturabo and was able to unbind an astropath, releasing warp smoke that coalesced into Horus's form. The War Master heavily chastised Perturabo, forcing him to kneel before him and call off the invasion of Tallarn. Eventually, long after they left, the poisonous smoke over the ruined planet cleared, allowing infantry to operate once again, but by this time, of course, the Iron Warriors were gone, and all that remained were the wrecks of the innumerable tanks committed to the war. This allowed the survivors of Tallarn to rebuild, even though their home was now naught but desert mostly devoid of life. At least as an upside, those wrecked tanks meant there was plenty of raw material available? Maybe? It is unclear what Tallarn regiments were like in the Imperial army before the Iron Warriors came, but in the aftermath of it and the separation of the Imperial army into the Astra Militarum and Imperial Navy, they became known as the Tallarn Desert Raiders. Honestly, if it weren't for them, the Imperium may well have given up on Tallarn entirely. The planet pretty much contributes nothing to the Emperor's domain, save their manpower, in the form of the Desert Raider regiments. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given they fought in the largest tank battle in human history at the time, the Desert Raiders are renowned for their use of both light and heavy armor. It is believed that APCs are still necessary to get across Tallarn's blasted surface at least to some extent, and the Desert Raiders know how to get the most out of these transports. Favoured infantry weapons include the missile launcher and the plasma gun, hard-hitting armaments that do ridiculous damage in a single strike, playing into the main method of warfare for the Tallarn regiments. The name Desert Raiders implies that they're good at raiding, and they are. Guerrilla warfare and hit-and-run strikes are their preferential method for waging war, and the combination of vehicles and high-damage weapons suits this down to the ground. They also make proficient use of vehicles such as sentinels, as well as the cavalry known as Rough Riders. In fact, they've had special mounts imported in just for this purpose. All this combines to fit the primary doctrine of the Tallarn Desert Raiders: stealth, speed, and a heavy killing blow, which almost sounds like the Talmont car, but that may just be me. Almost every Tallarn regiment contains a company or even more of them, whose purpose is long-range patrol and reconnaissance, probably including all of the elements discussed so far, but that isn't to say they can't beat you down in a straight-up fight. Their armoured regiments still contain artillery and super-heavy tanks, and I highly doubt the Desert Raiders are bad at using them. And though they don't have the same legendary reputation for their infantry as Mordians or Valhallans, they wouldn't have become so renowned if they weren't particularly handy in a fight. Oh, and it kind of goes without saying that they're rather adept at fighting in deserts or other similar climates, which probably influences in turn the war zones they're deployed to, at least to some extent. As concerns equipment, we've already made mention of the infantryman's preference for the plasma gun and the missile launcher, as well as the heavy use of APCs and sentinels, but the Desert Raiders have a very distinctive look to them as well. Survival in a desert with high temperatures and frequent sandstorms is difficult to say the least, so the uniform of Tallarn regiments reflects that. Loose-fitting clothing with resilient boots and protective headwear are typical for a Desert Raider, though I assume they have variants of this for less hospitable climates. Their usual colour scheme is as you would expect for desert camouflage, with yellows, whites, and browns being typical, but of course this varies from war zone to war zone depending on the camo needed. There are also a lot of cultural influences on the regiments and their mannerisms, as, well, you might expect. Tallarn is a tribal society, and though the tribes are usually allied, they do war amongst themselves on occasion, with one of the main dividing lines being the worship of the Emperor. Some tribes believe that the worship of the Emperor requires an intermediary, and this individual is always the most powerful astropath on Tallarn, known as the Oracle, with a K, not a C, don't ask. The Oracle is seen by those who believe in them in a manner akin to a living saint, but not everyone goes along with this, and one tribe is even believed to have killed an oracle in the past. They also worship the Emperor, by the way, this is just cultural difference in how it's done. There seems to be a lot of linguistic variety on Tallarn too, even discounting the imperial languages of High and Low Gothic. There are 4 languages known as cants just for use in combat alone, and though it's not known to hinder combat effectiveness if a regiment has a mix of languages, it's an interesting thing to note regardless, because languages are hard and trying to understand them in a firefight has got to be interesting. Having existed for 10,000 years in their current state, the Tallarn Desert Raiders have fought in many engagements across the galaxy. Not all of them were very far-flung, mind you, as Tallarn was invaded again in M32 by the returning Iron Warriors and by the Eldari of Craftworld Biel-Tan. Why? The curses of Alganar had resurfaced, and both armies sought to claim it either for use or just for safekeeping. Though initially it was a three-sided war at first, I assume, after a few months the Desert Raiders allied with Biel-Tan, and they were able to destroy and or drive off the Iron Warriors. This alliance wasn't actually superficial either. In the aftermath, Human and Eldari swore bonds of friendship before the Asayani departed and the Tallarn re-entombed the Black Oculus. If you want an example of the Desert Raiders utilizing their skill set while still being capable in head-on combat, then look no further than the Kamos Rebellion in M38, and no, this is not Fulgrim's former homeworld, it's a different spelling even if I pronounce it very similarly. This battle saw 6 Tallarn regiments and loyalists from the planet's own armies arrayed against the numerically superior force of the new planetary governor, who performed a coup d'etat against his predecessor. The Tallarn commander skirmished repeatedly, falling back time after time to string the rebels out before unleashing a large force of Rough Riders against artillery and other isolated forces. This battle, known as the Battle of the Broadsword after the river it was fought near, saw the remaining rebels encircled and destroyed over the next few days, a convincing Imperial victory that won the Desert Raiders many plaudits. Because they're Astra Militarum, and it's just kind of what the Astra Militarum does, the armies of Tallarn have also squared off against Orcs many times, sometimes successfully, and sometimes not. In fact, the Desert Raiders have been on the right and wrong end of a massacre, from their perspective of course, when fighting the Greenskins. The time it all went wrong was the massacre at Big Tooth River on the planet of Montar 7 in 987 M41. Though the Tallarn forces here were mostly cavalry alongside infantry of the Praetorian Guard, they ended up stretched out due to the miscommunication, allowing the Orcs to spring a deadly ambush. Further compounding things was the sudden activation of Gargants thought dormant and unfinished, and more than 80% of the Imperials were dead in just a few minutes. The meagre survivors were actually able to mount a pretty effective fighting retreat, but the world, and later the entire system, were lost to the Orcs. For at least a time anyway. Their space hulk was lost in the warp some time after, and the Imperium then took Montar back. On the flip side, there was the Arkan Basin Massacre 45 years earlier, taking place in Segmentum Pacificus on the world of Baal Prime. Though they were likely not the only Imperial forces deployed to the planet, the overall command fell to the Desert Raiders, and though they were rushed slightly by the ferocity of the Orc assault, their strategy worked a dream. By using the superior range of their tanks and their own maneuverability, they were able to both draw in and then encircle the Orcs, trapping them in the aforementioned Arkan Basin. The Orcs were slaughtered, and though PDF losses were relatively heavy, the Tallarn came out pretty much unscathed. Unfortunately, they did fail to slay the warboss in command, and though the war is not known to have seen huge success following the massacre, it's still a non-negligible thorn in the side of the Imperials, or at least it was for many months in the aftermath. Tallarn forces have also been deployed in some, if not all, of the Imperium's largest wars, though a particular note would be the Taros campaign, in which many Desert Raider regiments were part of the main invasion force against the Tau, who had annexed the planet. Suffice it to say, that war did not go well. Despite managing to assassinate the Ethereal in command of the Tau forces via an exploding Ursur assassin, the commander was able to survive and rally, using the death of the Ethereal as fuel for the Tau's rage that pretty much drove the Imperials off planet. The Tallarns in particular took extremely bad losses, with 2 regiments so heavily damaged that they couldn't even be fused together. They had to be O3 rolled into a third, and it may well have been worse without the intervention of Space Marines covering the retreat. More recently, things have been focused back home, as the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledictum triggered a demonic invasion of Tallarn. Whether the Black Oculus had anything to do with it, I cannot say, but it hasn't been observed as having activated, so probably not. Ultimately, it took the arrival of the Indomitus Crusade under Robert Guilliman to relieve the planet, though how the war was going before the Crusade arrived and whether the Primarch himself was there, I cannot unfortunately confirm. In any event, a force of Desert Raiders signed on with the Indomitus Crusade, and whilst their record in it is unknown, as is their fate after it, it's a hallmark of their grit and duty that they would do so, not stay and rebuild, go and take the fight to the enemy. The heroes of Tallarn are numerous and glorious, but some individuals and regiments have risen to fame even greater than their peers, ancestors, or descendants. Undoubtedly the most famous name to come out of Tallarn is Al-Rehem, a general from two separate eras that may well be the same person if warp shenanigans are factored in. The original Al-Rehem dates back to the Macarian Crusade in early M41, captain of the Tallarn 3rd Regiment, the Desert Tigers, and part of the very first invasion force of the Crusade on a human world. Deployed to and then crash landing on the desert world of Thoth, Al-Rehem spent his time amongst the local tribals after they saved him and his troops. Able to learn their language incredibly quickly, Al-Rehem learned that the Imperium was faring badly, with Chaos Sorcerers summoning demons to aid the defenders and also oppressing some of the tribes, including the one he was with. He was able to rally them and the rest of his men to lead a guerrilla war against the people of Thoth, and though I can't say how much that contributed to the eventual Imperial victory, he gained himself quite a reputation while he was at it. When he returned to the regiment in the Crusade, he and the tribes were famous, to the point that said tribes were permitted to evacuate the world before the Inquisition virus bombed it. They then joined the Imperium and repopulated Thoth along with the various genetic samples harvested during the evacuation, and to this day, the Lords Al-Rehem are the rulers of Thoth. On the other hand, the modern Al-Rehem is still around today, serving as a company commander in, once again, the Tallarn 3rd Regiment. Though calling him a commander in a logistical sense is perhaps a bit of a stretch. He delegates that to a subordinate quite often, but on the battlefield, he is near peerless at what he does. He is a gifted tactician with incredible patience, a gift for linguistics, and the ability to win respect even from the xenophobic Catachan jungle fighters. His specialism is primarily in reconnaissance and hit-and-run tactics like all Desert Raiders, but he's so damn good at it that he was able to out-hit and run and outflank the Eldari in the Battle of Esco's Moon. Whether the two are related in any way is unclear. It may just be a common name on Tallarn, the modern-day one may be descended from the Macarian Crusade one, or through time-bending warp shenanigans, maybe they're one and the same. We can't be sure. Though his actual combat record is unknown, one other individual I feel I need to mention is Susada Sin, a member of the Imperial army drafted from Tallarn that returned during its defense against the Iron Warriors. I assume he was an officer of a pretty high rank by this time, as though we don't know what he did in the battle, he had a big role to play in the aftermath. Sin was designated as the Governor Militant of Tallarn following the assassination of the previous one during the war, making him the highest ranking officer on the whole planet, and perhaps even its overall ruler since there was no planetary governor in place. You only get Governor Militants if there are no planetary governors. This made him pretty damn important to the rebuilding of Tallarn following its virus bombing, and perhaps he even helped shape the Desert Raiders and their doctrines for the rest of time. As far as famous regiments go, well, there are a few. One goes way back to M35, the Tallarn's 16th regiment of the time, whose first company were known as the Gravediggers. The reason for this comes from their battles against the Eldari on Holon Prime in the latter part of that millennium, where the Xenos were outmaneuvering them with incredible ease. It might well have been Simhan, hard to know, Eldari are like that. One of the captains suggested stripping down the chimeras of the patrol companies to help with maneuverability, and it was actually sufficient to overcome the odds and defeat the Eldar. Finally is Battle Group Desert Fox, a hybrid of several regiments including tanks and artillery. Unfortunately, during their battles against secessionists on the world of Lorthax, either the Munitorum, or the Administratum, or someone somewhere screwed up, and the tanks were deployed with no source of fuel. The Imperium of Man, ladies and gentlemen, I just have to applaud. Didn't have too bad of an effect, mind you, thanks to the members of Desert Fox being drawn from Tallarn and being deployed on what I assume to be a desert world. Reverting back to the old school methods from home, the regiments operated as light infantry, able to infiltrate the enemy lines and carry the day with ease. Shows the resourcefulness of the Desert Raiders as well as their skills, so full credit where credit is due. Not many regiments could pull that off. So end the tales of the Tallarn Desert Raiders. Much like many other worlds of famous Astra Militarum regiments, Tallarn has suffered greatly over its long history, in this case being virus bombed to a wasteland in the Horus Heresy. Nonetheless, the regiments drawn from there have turned that genocide and war to their advantage, becoming masters of armoured and desert combat with a particular knack for hit-and-run strikes. They may not be as famous as some of their compatriots, but undoubtedly they are a regiment of renown, and I'm glad to have visited them. I hope you've enjoyed this installment of our Regiments of Renown mini-series as we explore the famous names within the Astra Militarum. Next time, well, we have a bit of a triumvirate to finish off. This will conclude, I think, our look at all things inquisitorial, bringing to an end a road we started long, long ago when we first explored Malcador the Sigillite. For now though, thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.